Put the gun down, my voice cracked through the tense air, sharp enough to cut glass. The HOA security guy froze, his finger twitching on the trigger. You'd think he'd known better, but no, that was the day I realized these HOA bastards had no clue who they were messing with. Hey, I'm Michael Lawson. If you're watching this, drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from. Stick around because by the end you'll see exactly how we flipped the script on these control freaks who thought they could push us around. Spoiler, they didn't stand a chance. You see, this wasn't just about some petty parking violation or a noise complaint. No, this went deeper. Way deeper. This house isn't just a place to crash, it's my family legacy. My dad built this place by the lake from the ground up before the neighborhood turned into this HOA-controlled nightmare. That old kayak out back, it was his pride and joy, a symbol of freedom in simpler times. When he passed, I promised myself I'd protect that legacy, not just for me, but for my little girl and everyone who believes that property means something personal. But Margot, the HOA president, queen of petty tyranny, didn't care about any of that. To her, rules were weapons, and she wielded them with a cruelty that no one saw coming. It started small. A handwritten note left on my windshield. Unauthorized parking violation, $200, 0 cents fine. I laughed it off. Seriously? You're fining me for parking in my own driveway? My best friend Dave just shook his head. Dave's the guy Margot never wanted to face. Former Navy SEAL. Calm as a breeze, but sharper than a razor when the time comes. Watch your back, Michael, he warned. This Margot's a snake, but snakes bite themselves when cornered. We thought it'd stay petty. Maybe a few fines, a few letters, but Margot had other plans. The neighborhood began turning against us. Neighbors manipulated by her promises, thinly veiled threats, and whispered lies. The HOA board started showing up unannounced, scrutinizing every inch of our property. I felt the walls closing in. One evening, Margot stormed onto my porch, eyes blazing, pointing a finger at me like I was some criminal. Your boat is an eyesore. You have 24 hours to remove it. My boat, the same one my dad taught me to fish from on lazy summer mornings. You want me to just throw away my dad's memory, I said, voice steady but burning inside. Margot's smile was cold. Rules are rules, Mr. Lawson. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. Dave had been quiet during all this, observing, calculating. That night, as Margot's SUV disappeared down the street, he finally spoke. Those rules, paper thin when you know how to read between the lines. We sat on the dock, moonlight casting long shadows over the water. I told him about Dad, the kayak, the boat, the weekends spent here before life got complicated. This place is all I've got left from him. Dave nodded, eyes thoughtful. Then we'll fight, not with fists, with brains. Let's make sure Margot learns who she's messing with. It felt good hearing those words. Hope flickered. The next morning, Margot's posse was back, handing out citations for improper landscaping, excessive noise, and even unauthorized guests. The neighborhood's smiles were thin, forced. Some neighbors whispered that Margot had personal grudges, that her need for control went beyond HOA rules. That's when the first official letter arrived. Failure to comply will result in legal action. The board was flexing muscles, expecting us to fold. But that's not how I was raised. Dad always said, stand your ground, even if you stand alone. And I wasn't alone. Dave was there, steady as ever. And slowly, others started questioning Margot's reign. I won't lie, those early days were exhausting. Every knock on the door felt like a battle drum. The paranoia seeped in, the fear of losing what little I had left. But amid it all, there was laughter, too. Dave cracking jokes about how Margot's power trip might need a GPS to find reality. It helped keep us sane. And that's why you need to watch till the end, because of this story. It's about how we took those power-hungry HOA bullies who thought they could ruin a family legacy and turned the tables on them, all while keeping our heads high and a little smirk ready. When Margot and her crew dropped that first legal letter on my doorstep, I knew we had crossed from nuisance to full-blown war. The fine print was dense, littered with legal jargon designed to confuse and intimidate, but Dave, with his calm, calculated mindset, cut through the noise like a knife through fog. Listen, Michael, he said, sitting across the cluttered kitchen table. "These guys don't want to fight. They want to win on paper. We need to hit back where it hurts. Strategy, not just muscle." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. The house felt less like home and more like a battleground. I'd grown up here, chasing fireflies with my dad, listening to his stories of grit and determination. That same grit was about to be put to the test, and there was no turning back. The next HOA meeting was set for Thursday evening, a small but hostile gathering at the community center. Margot's voice ruled the room like a sharp whip, and her board members echoed her cold authority. The usual suspects: Carla with her sycophantic nods, Jeff's smirking intimidation, and Linda's sly interjections, all there, locked and loaded. "You all know why we're here," Margot began, eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. "Mr. Lawson's blatant disregard for community standards is unacceptable. The boat, the kayak, the guests, it's a pattern of disrespect." I raised my hand. "Excuse me, Margot. The boat and kayak have been part of my family's property since before this HOA was a thing. I pay my dues like everyone else. What exactly makes them unacceptable now?" Margot's smile was sharp, but her tone grew colder. "Because the community voted on these rules, Mr. Lawson. Your family's history doesn't exempt you." That was when I realized something. This wasn't just about rules. It was personal. Margot was targeting me to make an example, and she didn't care how much damage it did. After the meeting, Dave and I retreated to the dock, the only place where silence still existed. I told him about the evenings spent here with Dad, how the water used to calm me, how the kayak was more than just wood and paddles. It was a connection to my roots. "Margot wants a war," Dave said, scanning the darkened water, "but she's picked the wrong opponent." We spent the next days documenting everything: letters, fines, even pictures of the boat and kayak untouched and well kept. Dave reached out to a sharp lawyer, Jordan Blake, who specialized in property rights and HOA disputes. Jordan's first advice was simple but powerful. Don't fight fire with fire. Fight fire with water. Overwhelm them with facts, legal precedent, and community support. And so began the slow grind. We sent letters challenging the fines, requested HOA meeting minutes, and started gathering neighbors who felt the same sting of Margot's heavy hand. The community was fractured. Some were afraid of Margot's wrath, others skeptical of our fight. But slowly voices rose. Susan Miller, an elderly widow who'd been fined for a crooked mailbox, spoke out. Kevin Ramirez, a young father battling parking restrictions that interfered with his job schedule, joined in. Tanya Patel, a fiery activist new to the neighborhood, began organizing petitions. We were no longer alone. Margot's reaction was predictable. More threats, more fines, and then something new: unannounced inspections. One afternoon, as I worked on the boat's maintenance, 2 HOA security guards showed up, clipboard in hand, scrutinizing every inch. "Mr. Lawson, you're creating a nuisance," one said, tone dripping with condescension. "You have 24 hours to address the violations." I looked over at Dave, standing silently nearby, his gaze steady. There was no fear in his eyes, only resolve. "Violation of what exactly?" I asked. "The landscaping, the noise, the unauthorized guests. It's all documented." I let the guards finish their spiel and walked them to the gate. "Enjoy the view," I said with a wry smile. The tension was thick, but Dave's presence was a constant reminder that we weren't just fighting paper. The former SEAL knew how to keep his cool, turning every intimidation tactic into a chance to gather intel. One night, after a late strategy session, Dave leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "They're pushing hard because they're scared. Margot knows she's losing control." I sighed, exhaustion catching up. "Feels like we're digging a trench with spoons." He chuckled. "Sometimes spoons are all you need." Legal motions were filed, complaints logged, and the media started sniffing around. Margot's carefully constructed image of power began to crack. Neighbors whispered about the upcoming court hearings, about the courage it took to stand up. The community meetings grew louder, filled with a new energy, one of resistance, of hope. But Margot wasn't done. One morning, I found a notice on my door: immediate removal of all watercraft or face daily fines. It was a last-ditch effort to break me. That evening, Dave and I sat by the lake, the sky ablaze with sunset colors. "They think taking the boat will take the fight," I said, voice low. Dave smiled. They've forgotten the most important rule. You don't win by taking away what people love. You lose. That evening by the lake, as the sky bled fiery reds and oranges, Dave's words echoed in my mind. They've forgotten the most important rule. You don't win by taking away what people love. You lose. It was one thing to face letters and inspections, but Margot's latest ultimatum felt like she was poking a sleeping bear. The next morning, I was back on the dock, checking the boat's hull when a familiar black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb. Margot stepped out, her gaze icy and unwavering, flanked by two of her overbearing security guards. There was no hint of the usual formalities. This was enforcement made personal. "I'm here to enforce the removal order," Margot announced, voice sharp as broken glass. "You have until sundown to remove all watercraft or face legal consequences." I looked over my shoulder to Dave, who stood silently a few feet away. His calm presence grounded me. "You want the boat? Come take it," I said, voice steady. Margot's smirk was dismissive. "You're bluffing, Lawson." She motioned the guards forward. Their heavy footsteps on the wooden dock sounded like an ominous drumbeat. Hands hovered near their holstered weapons. Dave stepped up, unwavering. "Step back, gentlemen. This isn't your fight." Margot's tone hardened. "You will comply, or security will handle it." Then one guard suddenly pulled a pistol. The world seemed to slow. A tense silence cracked the morning calm. "Put the gun down," Dave commanded, steady and precise. The guard hesitated, then lowered the weapon. The power in Dave's presence was undeniable. Margot's furious glare told me she'd underestimated the stakes and the man. As the SUV sped away, the neighborhood's undercurrent shifted. The quiet fear that had gripped us began to loosen. Neighbors started nodding at us differently, some with sympathy, others with newfound respect. Susan Miller dropped off homemade cookies, Kevin Ramirez offered a hand fixing the dock, Tanya Patel organized the community like a whirlwind. We doubled down. Jordan Blake, our lawyer, filed countersuits and demands for transparency. Every attempt Margot made was met with meticulous legal resistance. Nights were spent poring over HOA bylaws and building a case that couldn't be ignored. At community meetings, Margot's iron grip faltered. Our shared stories and united front made her accusations ring hollow. When I stood to speak, the room stirred. This fight isn't just about my boat, it's about respect and fairness for all of us. The room's energy crackled, and Margot's steely gaze no longer held sway. With each inspection Margot sent, Dave turned intimidation into evidence. He filmed every overreach and heavy-handed move, building a record that would soon expose the board's true nature. The fight was wearing on us. Fear crept in whispers, but Dave's steady reminders kept us focused. Power without justice fears the truth. Our neighbors joined the fray, sharing stories, filing complaints, awakening the neighborhood from its silence. Margot's last attempt was a hailstorm of eviction threats and fines, but instead of breaking us, it galvanized our resolve. I called a meeting urging strategy over chaos. We win this by being smarter and united. That night, by the water's edge, Dave said, "We're close. Margot's empire is cracking." I nodded, knowing the hardest battle was just ahead. If you're still with me, drop a comment below, where are you watching from? Because this fight is far from over, and you won't believe how we flipped the script on those HOA tyrants. Stick around. These HOA bullies thought they had us cornered, but they're about to learn exactly who they're messing with. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. When Dave said, "We're close, Margot's empire is cracking," he wasn't just throwing out encouragement. It was a fact we were starting to see unfold in real time. Margot's grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and the community's pulse was quickening with hope and resistance. But hope doesn't win battles by itself. It takes strategy, grit, and knowing exactly when to strike. The court date was set, and the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. For weeks, Jordan Blake worked like a maestro, conducting a symphony of legal documents, depositions, and meticulous research. Dave and I spent countless hours collecting witness statements, filming the HOA's heavy-handed enforcement, and digging up the inconsistencies buried in Margot's board decisions. One afternoon, we gathered a small group of neighbors in my living room. Susan Miller with her crooked mailbox story, Kevin Ramirez with his parking battle, and Tanya Patel, whose fiery spirit was contagious. It was no longer about just my family's fight. It was a community standing up to injustice. Margot, of course, fought back. Her board sent out more letters, warnings of more fines, escalated penalties, and threats of liens on properties. But with every threat, our coalition grew stronger. Tanya's petitions spread like wildfire, and even the quietest neighbors started speaking up. At the next HOA meeting, Margot tried to flex her authority, but the atmosphere had shifted. The usual fearful nods were replaced with assertive glances. When she called out my name to shame me over the boat, a surprising chorus of voices defended me. One neighbor said, "We've all had issues with unfair fines. It's time for change." Jordan advised us to use this momentum. "Your strength lies not only in the facts, but in the voices of the community. Keep rallying support. Margot's power depends on division." We took that advice to heart. Meanwhile, Dave's background as a Navy SEAL proved invaluable beyond intimidation. His attention to detail and calm under pressure turned every HOA inspection into an opportunity to document abuses. He set up discreet cameras during meetings, catching board members whispering plans to sabotage neighbors. This evidence was pure gold. Our lawyer filed motions demanding transparency and suspension of all fines until a full review. Margot's reaction was a mix of fury and desperation. She increased patrols and threatened to revoke amenities for those who sided with us. The emotional toll wasn't lost on me. Each confrontation chipped away at the peace I once took for granted. I caught myself waking up in cold sweats, the weight of protecting my family's legacy crushing down. One night, Dave and I sat on the porch, the neighborhood quiet except for the occasional bark of a dog. "You're carrying a lot," he said quietly. I nodded. "This place is all I have left for my dad. Losing it feels like losing him all over again." Dave looked at me with steady eyes. "Then fight like you're fighting for him, because you are." We prepared for the hearing like soldiers ready for battle. Jordan coached us on court etiquette and arguments, while neighbors submitted affidavits and showed up to support. The day of the hearing arrived and the room was packed. Margot sat with a smug confidence that had clearly taken a hit, but she wasn't ready to surrender. Her lawyer made sweeping accusations about community standards and property rights. Then, one by one, Jordan dismantled their claims with evidence and neighbor testimonies. The footage Dave had captured was played, revealing the board's intimidation tactics in stark clarity. Margot's face paled as the tide turned. The judge's questions cut through the haze of misinformation, demanding accountability. When the verdict came, it was clear. The HOA's actions were excessive, the fines unjust, and the threats unlawful. Margot and her board were ordered to halt enforcement actions and initiate a community review. Walking out of the courthouse, relief washed over me like a wave. But the fight wasn't over. We had won a battle, not the war. Margot's hold on power was broken, but the real victory was the neighborhood waking up to its own strength. Back at home, neighbors gathered for a small celebration. Susan brought her famous pie, Kevin shared stories of his family's struggles, and Tanya started planning next steps for community reforms. Dave clapped me on the shoulder. "You stood firm, your dad would be proud." I smiled, eyes misting. This was more than about boats or fines. It was about standing up for what's right, for family, for a community that deserved better. The court ruling was a victory, but as Dave reminded me, battles are won in court, wars are won in hearts and minds. Margot's bruised ego was fueling a desperate push to cling to her fading authority. This was the moment the fight would get uglier and smarter. The very next HOA meeting was set to be a showdown. The community center was packed, tension thicker than the summer heat. Margot arrived with all the bravado of a queen defending her throne, but this time she faced a crowd transformed, neighbors no longer timid but emboldened. She started the meeting with sharp accusations, trying to paint us as troublemakers undermining community harmony. But the room's mood shifted when Tanya stepped forward. "We're here because Margot turned our neighborhood into a battleground. This isn't harmony, it's tyranny." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Margot's glare cut Tanya down, but the damage was done. Support for our cause surged like wildfire. I stood to speak next, voice steady but charged with conviction. "This fight isn't just about me or my family's boat. It's about fairness, respect, and reclaiming our community from those who abuse power." Faces lit up with agreement. Even those who'd been silent before nodded. Margot's tight grip on control was slipping fast. Behind the scenes, Dave and I had been working on a plan that combined legal muscle with a public campaign. We launched a website documenting the HOA's abuses, sharing stories, photos, and videos. The media caught wind, and soon reporters were knocking on doors. Margot tried to spin it as a smear campaign, but the evidence was too strong. Community support kept growing, making it impossible for her to maintain the narrative. The board tried to retaliate with more fines and threats, but our legal team was ready. Jordan filed injunctions halting all new penalties, while neighbors filed complaints with the city and state regulators. One afternoon, Margot's security team showed up unexpectedly at my door again. Dave was there, ready. Instead of intimidation, Dave calmly recorded their actions, later submitting the footage to the authorities. Margot's frustration was palpable. She escalated to personal attacks, trying to discredit me and key neighbors. But every attempt backfired, revealing her desperation and poor leadership. Community meetings became forums for honest conversation. Tanya organized workshops teaching residents their rights and how to deal with HOA bullying. We built networks of support and shared resources. One evening, at a gathering by the lake, I looked around at my neighbors, friends now, and felt the weight of what we'd built. This fight was bigger than any one of us. Dave raised his glass to standing up, staying smart, and taking back what's ours. We all cheered, knowing the war wasn't over, but the tide was turning. If you're still watching, drop a comment right now. Where are you tuning in from? Because what you're witnessing isn't just a fight over a boat or some petty rules. It's a community rising up, taking back what's theirs. And trust me, these HOA bullies thought they had us beaten. They were dead wrong. Stick around. This story's about to get even more satisfying. After the community rally and media attention, it felt like a new energy had taken root. Margot's power was slipping through her fingers like sand, but that only made her more dangerous. Desperation has a way of pushing people to extremes, and Margot was no exception. One late afternoon, I received a call from Tanya. Her voice was tight with urgency. Margot's calling a special emergency board meeting. Word is, she's planning something drastic. You need to be there. I exchanged a glance with Dave, whose calm demeanor masked the storm brewing beneath. We'll be there. The community center was packed that evening, standing room only. The air was thick with anticipation. Margot appeared with her usual icy composure, but I noticed the subtle tremor in her hand as she held the microphone. She started with a veiled threat, warning the community that disruptive elements would be dealt with swiftly. The words were clear. She intended to reassert control, no matter the cost. Tanya stood up, voice steady. We're not disruptive elements. We're residents demanding fairness and transparency. Your reign of fear ends here. Margot shot back with venom. You think you're clever? This community thrives on order. Without it, chaos reigns. I caught Dave's eye, his jaw tightened. We knew chaos was exactly what Margot feared, losing control. Margot unveiled her plan, a series of new, stricter rules and fines designed to break the resistance. Among them, a proposal to limit gatherings, restrict property usage, and impose exorbitant fees. The room erupted. Neighbors shouted objections. Susan Miller, despite her usual quiet nature, spoke up with surprising fire. These rules aren't about order, they're about punishment. Margot tried to silence her, but the moment had slipped beyond her grasp. The community united in voice and spirit. The energy was electric. After the meeting, Dave and I regrouped with Jordan and Tanya. We knew this was a turning point. Margot was running out of options and was ready to escalate to intimidation and legal warfare. We devised a two-pronged strategy. Legal challenges to block the new rules and a campaign to elect new board members committed to fairness. Weeks passed with intense legal battles, petitions, and door-to-door conversations. Tanya's leadership galvanized the community. More neighbors signed petitions and shared stories of HOA overreach. Margot retaliated with threats, but every move was countered with solidarity. Our community meetings shifted from defensive to proactive planning. One evening, as we strategized under the glow of porch lights, Dave mused, Margot's biggest mistake was underestimating our will. I nodded, feeling the weight of the fight but also the power of unity. Finally, election day arrived. The neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. For years, Margot's board had gone unchallenged, but this time, change was within reach. Votes were tallied in the community center's modest room. When the results came in, cheers erupted. Our candidates won decisively. Margot's reign was over. The new board immediately began reviewing the disputed rules, reversing unjust fines, and fostering open communication. Susan Miller smiled as she passed me on the street. Feels like we got our neighborhood back. Kevin Ramirez waved as he unloaded his kids from the car. This is what community looks like. That night, Dave and I sat on the dock, the lake calm and reflective. I think your dad would be proud, I said softly. Dave smiled. You didn't just fight for a boat or house, you fought for respect and dignity. With Margot's defeat solidified and the new board firmly in place, the neighborhood finally began to breathe again. But winning the battle didn't mean the war was over. It was time to rebuild, reclaim, and restore what had been lost. The new board wasted no time. Within weeks, they repealed the harshest fines and reversed the most oppressive rules Margot had shoved through. Transparency meetings were held openly, giving voice back to residents who'd felt silenced for years. Susan Miller, once hesitant to speak, now led workshops helping neighbors understand their rights and how to prevent future abuses. Kevin Ramirez organized community events to strengthen bonds. Tanya Patel continued mobilizing neighbors, turning the neighborhood into a true community again. For me, it was deeply personal. The boat and kayak weren't just objects, they were symbols of a family legacy, of summers spent with Dad teaching me to fish, to respect the water and to stand my ground. Watching the boat restored to its rightful place, shining under the sun, felt like a quiet victory, a reclaiming of history. Dave was quieter these days, the storm having passed, but his presence was still a steady reassurance. One evening on the dock, I told him, "This fight changed me. I thought it was about protecting a piece of property, but it's so much more. It's about dignity, respect, and standing up when no one else will." He nodded thoughtfully. "You turned a neighborhood divided into a community. That's rare." Even Margot had faded into the background. The woman who once wielded power like a hammer now barely whispered through the grapevine. The HOA's new leadership made sure her legacy was one of caution, a reminder that abuse of power never goes unchecked. Our victory wasn't just legal or political, it was emotional and communal. Neighbors who once locked their doors now greeted each other warmly. The lakefront gatherings resumed, laughter filling the air again. The community had been bruised but emerged stronger, wiser. At a small summer festival we organized, I watched kids playing near the water, families sharing meals, and friends old and new swapping stories. I thought about my dad and the promises I made. To protect what mattered, to fight for fairness. And that's what I want you to take away from this story. Fights like this aren't just about property or rules. They're about holding on to what makes us human, our dignity, our sense of justice, and our courage to stand up when the odds are stacked against us. If you're watching this while facing your own HOA nightmare, remember, knowledge is power, patience is strength, and the right moment to push back is always worth waiting for. Stand firm, gather your allies, and never underestimate what a determined community can achieve. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and share your story, because you're not alone, and sometimes the quietest fight makes the loudest impact.